Right, so welcome. It is April Fool's Day, April 1st. And I'm going to set my timer. So hopefully we can keep our time around 23 minutes or less. Okay, so this is medicinal chemistry. And on Monday we talked about the different phase, preclinical trials, phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 studies and the specific aims. Now we're going to finish up chapter 15 today, and you all have a quiz today, okay, on Canvas. What we're going to talk about here is patenting, and regulatory. There is a lot of work that goes into patent and regulatory agencies, and this is a nice career. We actually have um, an FDA hub in Cincinnati, Ohio, okay, and St. Xavier in Cincinnati offers a master's in regulatory affairs. Okay, so you can basically get a master's in drug regulation and you could work straight with the FDA. A lot of times they have to do inspections overseas, and they also do this locally. For a drug to make it to market in America, they have to pass FDA inspection. This is very costly for a company, and basically there's a lot of data integrity that has to be evaluated. And if you're an FDA inspector, you have to look at all of the data in the laboratory and in the clinical data and decide whether it is accurate, if it's ethical. There's a saying, if it's not written, then it didn't happen. Now, why would that be important? Well, would you want your family members to be given a drug that didn't have the accurate dosing? What if it didn't have the accurate dose, or they didn't have the accurate active pharmaceutical ingredient? Okay, so let's write that. That is an API, okay, the active pharmaceutical ingredient. So if it doesn't have the amount that it says it's in there, and also shelf life. Shelf life can decrease the amount of actual drug that gets delivered. So this is the purpose of FDA. FDA is to ensure the safety of the drug and the efficacy of the drug, okay? And that is the whole point of the FDA. So one of the ways they do this is through patents. And having spent enormous amounts of time and money on research and development, a pharmaceutical company will want to reap the benefits of its hard work. And so it has to have exclusive rights to the market. If they've spent all this money on lead optimization, working out the dosing, the toxicity studies, all the phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials, and now we're at phase 4, folks. We're on the market, okay? Well, up until now, there's been no money earned, okay? So you have to make that money on the market. And so that's what is concerned with patent life. And this is a lot of argument with the different companies in different countries now. So patent law is also very precise and varies from country to country. Therefore, submitting a patent is best left to the patent attorneys and lawyers. A patent application can be made to the European Patent Office. So this is the European Patent Office. Now I have my name on 3 patents, and they are world patents. I didn't actually have to do any of this work, right? I wrote up the experimentals, which I have you all to do in labs. So I would have to write up the experimentals. And of course, I was the first to make that drug molecule and test it in the target in vivo. And then we also did in vitro and in vivo. So I was part of that, but the lawyers actually filled out all the paperwork for the patent work. So first, if you go to the European Patent Office, a lot of times you just need to know these acronyms. So I gave you a list of acronyms, okay, to know, and I want you just to go through and list those and write that on your POGL, okay? So go through this last chapter, and that's pretty much what you're doing. Um, there's the Patent Corporation Treaty, and just I'm going to let you all read this, okay, on your own. Pay for delay deals. So I'm on page 292. Pay for delay deals. What is that? It's a growing trend in the pharmaceutical sector for drugs that are nearing the end of their patent life. So it can involve a pharmaceutical company making a deal with a manufacturer that specializes in producing off-patent drugs of generics. I know that Lilly did this with Prozac and Bayer Pharmaceuticals. Um, so they went generic, and I think they got 6 months exclusivity on the market. I mean, we're looking at millions versus billions of dollars if you can get that exclusivity on the market. Um, there are fewer drugs reaching the market to take their place. This is known as a patent cliff. It's caused by many large pharmaceutical companies rethinking their business strategy. Um, Another thing that you can do in the patent area is called chiral switching. And so 30% of drugs between 1983 to 1987 were pure enantiomers. So basically all R, S. And then 29% were racemates. And 41% achiral. Nowadays, the market has pure enantiomers. Okay, so that increases how many drugs you can get on the market. Um, okay, so what is this? The WTO, that is the World Trade Organization. That's kind of important. And like if you work in this, you have to deal with the World Trade Organization for drugs. I've gone to some of the regulatory meetings up in Xavier, and I've met the head of the European um, drug data integrity, and they've talked about stories of how they've gone to different countries like India and China, and how they don't have the same data integrity laws. And so when an FDA person comes on site, they have to have their badge. They have to identify themselves as an FDA inspector. And then they'll say, you want this drug on the market, we want to see your books. And there's times when the stories are hilarious. I guess they're not really. It's kind of sad, but different head people like hiding their books and not wanting to show their books, and just a lot of what we call data integrity issues. That's why you have to, like if you write down 7.436 grams and it was really 4.736 grams, you got to draw a line through it so you can still see it, and then you have to write down that that was the incorrect amount, and you have to initial it and date it. So something like that, right? And then that's all about data integrity. Okay, so FDA, what is FDA? This is the Food and Drug Administration. of the USA. And when you start working on a drug molecule, so when we would start working on a drug molecule, we would have to file an IND. Okay, an IND is the investigational exemption to a new drug application. So we would do that before we actually started doing chemistry on the drug. And that gives us a little niche in the market. So you file the NDA. It's a confidential agreement submitted to the FDA. The IND should contain information regarding the chemistry, the manufacturer, quality control of the drug, information on its pharmacology and pharmacokinetics, and toxicology. Okay, so usually these are all preclinical trials. Okay, so once you've done that, you can file the IND. But keep in mind, an IND, gosh, I want to say it's about $65,000 just to submit the paperwork. Okay, so you want people that, one of the big buzzwords in this area of work is detail-oriented people. Okay, you do not want to lose that paperwork because someone didn't fill the paperwork out correctly. Okay, so we want detail-oriented people working on these documents. And then if you get into clinical trials, and this happens as the clinical trials are going on, and you want to get able to go to phase 4. Okay, so you want to get that drug on the market. At this point, you're going to have to fill out a new drug application. That's an NDA. Okay, and that is 400 to 700 pages in volume. I've worked on these as well. So these typically have all your data. So you have to do your metabolite profiling. So you got to know every metabolite. You have to be able to identify it. You have to have HPLC, mass spec, and UV. It's called method validation. So you basically know exactly what your chromatography parameters are and the retention time. Okay, because you want these drug molecules to be able to be dissolved and then put in a HPLC UV so you can get a spectrum. So you can say, okay, this is my API at 2.0 minutes, and this here is an impurity at maybe 7.3 minutes, right? And this impurity doesn't cause toxic effects, okay? And those are kind of the things you have to have in this report. The labeling of the drug. How are you going to label the drug? The dosing and the regime, the regimen of the dosing, okay? The physician has to know the drug metabolism, and that has to be all on your label, okay? The FDA inspectors, before they'll approve this, they will not approve an NDA until they inspect your facilities, okay? And when they inspect, they come for a visit. They want to see all records associated with that NDA, okay? They literally, in companies, they'll go up into a room and there'll be maybe 2 or 3 people assigned with a company that's allowed to talk to the FDA. Not everybody will be allowed to interact with the FDA, and someone will be a runner. They'll have to go and get all the documents that that FDA inspector wants. And usually these side things are 2 to 3 days, and they are drooling, and everybody are on edge. And then if it passes, then you go out for celebration. It is a very exciting time because everything you worked for, that is the goal, to get it on market. If not, you will get something called 483s, and these are citations, and they're usually red flags, and you might be given 6 months to fix those red flags. And if you just have a few, that's good. If you have a lot, they can just shut you down right there. And there have been companies that have been shut down immediately on site and told to go home. And that is a hard time. Okay, so once an NDA is approved, so your new drug application is approved, if you have any kind of modifications, you have, in drug manufacturing synthesis or analysis, these have to have already been approved. So you cannot make any changes, okay? If you get changes, then you have to actually get approval, reapproval, and sometimes that will actually be a new NDA. There's also NCE, new chemical entity or new molecular entity. These are all about the API, okay? Active pharmaceutical ingredient. There's also biologics. Biologics are drugs such as antibodies and recombinant proteins. And they have kind of their own list of documents that they have to be approved. What about fast tracking and orphan drugs? I got to know what these are. So fast tracking certain types of drugs to reach the market as quickly as possible. That's what we're dealing with COVID-19. Okay, so how can you fast track a drug? Well, you can have smaller number of participants in your phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials, okay, before the drug is forwarded and approved. They did this with cancer, Tamiflu, the treatment of flu, drugs. Orphan drugs are effective against relatively rare diseases, and sometimes they can be kind of fast-tracked. An orphan drug is defined as one that is used for less than 200,000 people. A lot of times pharmaceutical companies will not touch orphan drugs because there's not a lot of money associated with them. It costs so much to develop a new drug that one of your driving forces is how much is the market value of the drug. When I would get these, I don't know, let's say 80-page proposals when we'd start on a drug molecule, we would have, the first line was the forecasted market value. And so I worked on obesity and cancer. So the attitude of pharmaceutical companies towards orphan drugs has changed following the therapeutic and financial success of this imatinib, because it was also able to help with cancer. All right, some other data integrity, just acronyms you need. A lot of times if I go for a job in this regulatory world, I really polish up on my acronyms. So GLP is good laboratory practice. GMP, good manufacturing practice. GCP is good clinical practice. You also have IRB, is the Institutional Review Board. And so they're the ones that look at your NDAs and people and facilities. And the NICE, NICE, so the National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence. So those are listed there. You also have them listed on your slides under Module 4. The rest of Chapter 15 just talks about how the drugs have to meet certain specifications. That's the final product and determined by various analytical tests and purity standards. The process development, you have to have impurity profiling, and this involves the isolation of preparative HPLC followed by NMR, spectroscopy, and mass spec to identify the structure. So those are important processes in order to get a drug to market. That wraps up Chapter 15. So hopefully you are ready to take your quiz, and we will start Part D on Monday, and Part D is going to talk about the different synthesis tools in order to optimize a lead compound, and we'll talk about combinatorial chemistry, parallel synthesis, solid phase organic synthesis, and then computer programs that do quantitative structure activity relationships. All right, have a good weekend.